When a bird goes too long without water, the crisis begins at the cellular level. Blood thickens, muscle coordination degrades. For a crow flying over an arid landscape, finding hydration is a strict biological ticking clock, and time has almost completely run out. Then, a sudden visual stimulus triggers a spike of adrenaline. Sitting isolated in the dirt is a pitcher, holding a pool of fresh, clear water. But landing on the rim brings an immediate drop in morale. The water sits at the very bottom of the vessel, far below the crow's beak. The resource required to stave off death is perfectly visible, reflecting the sunlight. Yet, because of the container's shape, it remains entirely inaccessible. This diagram illustrates the exact physical geometry of the problem. You have a pitcher with a narrow neck and a deep base. The liquid sits exactly 6 inches below the maximum downward reach of the bird's anatomy. No amount of thirst and no amount of sheer biological drive can stretch a beak past its physical limits. The parameters of the pitcher create a spatial puzzle that ignores desire. Surviving the next hour requires bridging a seemingly impossible gap between the bird's biological necessity and the hard spatial constraints of the clay. The brain's first instinct in a life-threatening crisis is to bypass complex thought and deploy raw, uncalculated power. The crow frantically strikes the sides of the pitcher, attempting to shatter the thick clay walls with repeated blows from its beak. The strikes bounce off. The tactic immediately pivots. The bird drops to the ground and throws its entire body weight against the heavy base, trying to shove and overturn the vessel. The pitcher doesn't move. This is a classic example of cognitive tunneling. During high-stress scenarios, the brain hyper-focuses exclusively on the most obvious, forceful solution, blinding itself to anything outside of the immediate obstacle. Unchecked willpower, misapplied as pure brute force, fails to solve the spatial problem. It only burns precious calories, accelerating exhaustion and the onset of death. The physical attacks cease because they have to. The crow hits a point of complete exhaustion and is forced to stand completely still. Halting the attack breaks the cognitive tunnel. With the frantic movement paused, the bird's field of vision widens to include the surrounding environment. Lying scattered in the dirt, entirely ignored during the initial panic, are several dozen small, heavy pebbles. Intentionally stepping back from a failing strategy provides the necessary mental space to observe the environment and recognize alternative tools. The chaotic energy is replaced by slow, deliberate action. The crow picks up a single pebble, carries it to the rim, and drops it into the narrow neck of the pitcher. This cross-section diagram demonstrates the core physical mechanism at play: volumetric displacement. When a solid object enters a confined space, it forces the liquid upward by an equivalent geometric volume. Executing this requires patience. The crow repeats the process, dropping stones into the base. Slowly, the water level rises toward the reachable neck. The bird survives by manipulating environmental elements to alter the physical constraints of the trap itself. The waterline breaches the necessary threshold. The crow drinks its fill, restores its biological baseline, and takes flight. Survival was secured entirely through an intellectual pivot, bypassing the need for physical superiority. The classic moral extracted from this fable is simple: where there is a will, there is a way. We often misunderstand willpower as the stubborn willingness to endure pain while repeating the same exhausting actions. Striking a clay pot until you collapse is a display of panic, not resolve. The way out of a crisis is rarely obvious. It must be constructed piece by piece through careful observation and the use of external tools. True will is the mental resilience required to admit a current strategy is failing, abandon brute force, and invent a calculated approach. Ultimate survival belongs to those who successfully combine the relentless biological drive to live with the ingenuity to adapt.